traveler. You've wandered far, haven't you? Through long days and longer thoughts, through battles seen and unseen, but here, within the hush of these stone halls, beneath a sky dressed in starlight, you are safe. You've carried much, more than any soul should bear alone. Expectations, doubts, a mind that runs faster than your feet ever could. But now it is time to rest. Set down your sword. Remove the weight of your armor. Let your shoulders fall from the burden they've held all day. There is no one to impress here, no battle to win, no perfect version of you that must be performed. You have done enough. You are enough. Outside, the wind weaves softly through the towers of Minas Terra, the great stone castle built by the hands of many and the hearts of the weary. A single candle flickers beside you. Its glow dances against the old stone walls, casting shadows that do not threaten, only remind. There is warmth here. There is stillness. There is peace, waiting patiently for you to arrive. And tonight you are not alone. For once, long ago, though not so far from now, there was another who felt as you do. A knight, brave, yes, skilled, yes, but burdened, oh so burdened. His name was Sir Brendon. You may not know him by title or by song, for his greatness was not carved into history by conquest or gold. No, his was a quieter path. He was known not for how loudly he fought, but for how gently he learned to listen, not for how perfectly he performed, but for how fully he learned to be. And in his journey, through fear, through doubt, through silence, he became more than what others expected. He became who he was always meant to be. And so, if your thoughts have been heavy, if your mind feels loud tonight, let me tell you his story. Let me take you where the fire glows low, where the forest breathes, where the cave speaks, where peace waits patiently like an old friend. Close your eyes, noble traveler. The world can wait. Tonight, your only task is to be still, to rest, to remember you are not broken. You are becoming. Shh. It's all right now. There is no war here. Only quiet. Only peace. Let's take a moment. Not to fight the thoughts, but to lay them gently down. Even the bravest knights must remove their armor. Let us do the same. Slowly, mindfully, together. Start at the top, your brow, furrowed all day perhaps without you noticing. Imagine unbuckling a metal circlet around your head. Feel the release as it lifts. Let your forehead soften. The lines disappear. There is no crown of pressure here. Now your jaw, often clenched like you're holding something in, unlatch the unseen helmet. Feel it fall away with a whisper of wind. Your mouth is relaxed. Your breath flows easier now. Let's move to your shoulders, where the weight always gathers. Unfasten the steel pauldrons. Let them fall with a soft, echoing thud to the castle floor. Breathe in and exhale as your shoulders drop. Lower now, your chest and heart, bound beneath a breastplate of worry. Undo the clasp slowly, gently. With every release, feel your ribs expand. Feel your heart beat softer, not faster. It has fought for you all day. Now it can simply rest. Next, your arms and hands, the gauntlets that gripped, held, clenched through invisible battles. Slide them off, one by one. Your hands, free now. No need to grasp. Let them rest by your side, open, at ease. Now your waist and back. Unfasten the belt of judgment. Let it slide away. You don't need to hold yourself so tightly. You are safe here, even when you are soft. Your legs wrapped in tension, always ready to flee or chase. Release the greaves. Let your thighs and calves grow heavy. Let your feet melt into the earth beneath you. And finally, your sword, the one you carry every day. The one made of expectations, fears, perfectionism. You don't need it tonight. Lay it beside you. Let it rest. As you do, now take a slow breath in through the nose. Feel it move through your chest, your belly, your legs, and release again and again. Your body is no longer at war. Your thoughts are no longer in charge. There is only stillness now, a hearth fire glowing within you, quiet, kind, undemanding. You are no longer the anxious knight preparing for battle. You are simply Brendon, a soul learning how to be, and you are safe. Let the force gather around you now. Let the stars come closer and listen, because here begins the tale. Sir Brendon stood tall, as he always had, in polished silver armor that caught the firelight just so, with a back straight from years of training, a gaze steady enough to fool even the most discerning noble. And yet, beneath that steel and silence, his mind was anything but still. Minas Terra was a castle of great legends, built high upon the stone cliffs above the valley of Vale. Its halls were wide, its banners proud, and its expectations heavy. Sir Brendon was the only son of High Marshal Alric, the greatest knight the realm had known in a generation, and while others saw Brendon as a rising flame, he only felt like a fading echo. He was good, skilled even, but inside he questioned every step, replayed every word, measured his every movement, certain it was never quite enough. You must think like a leader. You carry the name now, boy. You cannot afford to be soft. Soft, a word that stung more than any sword ever could. This night, the grand hall echoed with celebration. Torches lined the walls. Music swirled like smoke, and long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and gold-trimmed goblets. Brendon sat at the edge of it all, his jaw tight behind a polite smile. He nodded when spoken to. He laughed when expected. He held a goblet, though he hadn't taken a sip. And through it all, his thoughts looped endlessly. You should be enjoying this. You're weak for feeling this way. What if they find out you're barely holding it together? Room spun. Not from wine, but from worry. His heartbeat thundered beneath his armor. A drop of sweat traced his spine. He rose, muttering something about the wind, and slipped away through a side hall no one noticed. Out on the stone balcony, the night air was crisp. It whispered through the columns, cool against his burning skin. Brendon gripped the railing, eyes shut tight. Why does it feel like I'm fighting something I can't even see? He had faced beasts in battle, sparred champions, endured injuries, but nothing left him as exhausted as his own mind. And that's when he heard it. A voice, not sharp, not loud, soft, like breath across the ear. There is another way. Brendon turned. No one there, just the wind, and yet the words remained. That night, long after the candles had burned low and the music faded behind closed doors, Brendon stood at the gates of Minas Terra. He looked once over his shoulder at the stone halls that raised him. Then he stepped beyond them into the dark beyond the torches, into the quiet, into the unknown, and somewhere, not far, the wind stirred again, not pushing, not pulling, just inviting. The moon was high, silver, round, and quiet, like it too was watching him. Sir Brendon walked without haste, yet with purpose. Each step further from the castle felt lighter and heavier somehow. He didn't know what he was seeking only that he couldn't stay where he was. Minas Terra had been his forge, but it had also been his cage. The landscape changed slowly as he walked. Stone paths gave way to dirt. Dirt softened into moss. The air grew cooler, not cold, just clear, cleansing. Leaves rustled above him like whispers between old friends. He had heard stories of mason wood all his life, a forest older than the kingdom itself, a place where time drifted, where paths moved, where silence had a voice. It welcomed him differently, not with grand enchantments or sudden signs, but with slowness, the way the wind softened, the way the trees swayed without sound, the way even his racing thoughts began to walk instead of run. The forest did not demand, it didn't expect anything of him, and that, more than anything, unnerved him. A small creek appeared ahead, its waters glowing faintly with moonlight. Brendon knelt beside it, cupping the water in his hands. He drank, not out of thirst, but ritual. It tasted like nothing and everything, like the first breath after tears, like sleep after a long day. He continued on. At one point, he passed beneath two trees whose trunks bent toward each other, forming a perfect arch. Beyond them, the forest changed, the shadows deepened, the stars above multiplied, and the ground beneath his boots felt more like memory than earth. A fox crossed his path, silver-furred, eyes the color of dawn. It paused, looked directly at him, then vanished without sound. He was not alone in this place, but he was not in danger. At last, he reached a small clearing, a fallen log, a circle of mushrooms, and a single unlit lantern hanging from a crooked branch. He sat, for no reason, except that he was tired of walking, of worrying, of holding it all so tightly. He let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding, and the moment he did, the lantern flickered to life. A golden flame, small, steady, no spark, no flint, just being. Brendon stared at it, mesmerized. Even the smallest light, he thought, can burn without effort. The fire did not try. It just was, and in that moment, Brendon, Knight of Minas Terra, son of the High Marshal, burdened by years of pressure and doubt, felt something inside him begin to soften. He would rest here tonight, beneath the stars, within the quiet, at the edge of something he couldn't name, and as he closed his eyes, he felt For the first time in years, a sliver of peace. Morning in Maston Wood came slowly. There was no fanfare, no blinding light, just the gentle sigh of the trees and the golden hush of daybreak slipping between the leaves. Sir Brendon woke beneath the twisted canopy, his body sore, but his mind quiet, not silent, but less heavy. The lantern that had lit itself the night before still glowed faintly, though no oil fed its flame. He stood, stretched, and walked. He didn't know where the path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't try to plan it. The birds were not singing songs of cheer, but observation, light, distant, curious, like they were watching him, measuring his stillness. The trees, too, seemed alive with listening. Brendon passed through a veil of mist and came upon a small cottage, barely visible behind a wall of green. Vines climbed the stone. Chimes made of bone and wood swayed gently in the wind. A garden thrived, wild but not chaotic, and seated on a low wooden bench, whittling a piece of driftwood, was an old man, not in armor, but with the posture of someone who once wore it. He looked up before Brendon spoke. "Ah," the man said softly, smiling without surprise. "You're early." Brendon blinked. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," the man replied, setting the wood aside. "But I know the weight you carry. I once carried it too." Brendon hesitated. There was no threat here, just calm. Unshakable, quiet calm. The man motioned to a stump across from him. "Come, sit. Your legs are not as weary as your thoughts, but they will thank you all the same." Brendon obeyed, lowering himself slowly, eyes never leaving the man's. "You were a knight," the man chuckled. "Was. Still am, in some ways. Only now I tend to see it's more than swords." Brendon looked down at his hands. His fingers flexed, fidgeted, always ready, always braced. The man saw this and said gently, "You were trained to fight, to think ahead, to stay alert. But no one taught you how to rest, did they?" Brendon looked up, startled. "Rest," the man continued, "isn't weakness, it's a skill. One most knights never learn." Brendon didn't know what to say, so he didn't. They sat in silence for a while, not awkward, just shared. A bluebird landed nearby, pecking the ground. The chimes stirred softly, and then the man said, "You know, I used to believe my worth was tied to how hard I fought, to how much I endured, to how tightly I held it, all in." He looked at Brendon, but I was wrong. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is soften, to breathe, to stop bracing for battle when the war isn't here. Brendon exhaled, not because he understood, but because maybe he was beginning to. Port Levidor shimmered in the valley like a lantern-lit painting, colorful, loud, pulsing with life. Stalls lined the cobbled streets. Music poured from alleyways. Laughter echoed off painted walls, and everywhere, masks, paper, clay, wood, gold. No face was bare. Everyone was someone else, or no one at all. Brendon entered the city on foot, his cloak drawn up, his sword hidden beneath it. Even masked, he felt seen. Too many eyes, too much sound. His breath quickened, his thoughts rushed back in. What if they notice me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't belong here? He gripped the stone the child had given him in Levidor days before. It was smooth now, worn by his fingers. He closed his eyes, breathed in, breathed out. Just walk. The heart of the festival was a plaza lit by floating lanterns. There was dancing, fire breathers, painted musicians, joy everywhere. But Brendon couldn't feel it. He watched a woman laugh with her friends, but the moment they turned away, her smile dropped. He saw a masked man cheer loudly, then slump when no one noticed. Even here, Brendon realized, everyone's pretending. He stood at the edge of it all, until a small hand tugged at his cloak. A boy, maskless, eyes wide. "Sir," the boy said, "you look tired. Do you want to sit with us?" Brendon looked past him, a quiet spot beneath a tree, where two other children and an old woman shared bread. "Yes," Brendon whispered, "I do." That night he sat with strangers who did not ask him to prove himself. He ate simple food, laughed without knowing why, and took off his hood. No one commented, no one needed to. Before he left, the old woman pressed a small paper mask into his hand, painted not in gold, but in silver and gray. "Sometimes," she said, "the face you hide is the one most worth showing." Brendon nodded. He didn't wear the mask, but he kept it. The road beyond Port Levidor narrowed into a path of reeds and low mist. A river waited, wide, slow-moving, and silver in the moonlight. No bridge, no guards, just a rickety dock and a lone wooden boat tied to a post. Brendon approached quietly, unsure. The boatman sat cross-legged inside, wrapped in a cloak the color of driftwood. His face was half-shadowed, his beard flecked with frost. Though the night was warm, You heading across?" the boatman asked without looking up. Brendon nodded. "Climb in. The river remembers those who hesitate." The boat rocked gently as Brendon sat. No oars moved, and yet the current took them. Silence. Mist drifted along the surface. The stars shimmered like spilled ink. Brendon looked around, then at the boatman. "Have you taken many nights across this river?" The boatman smiled faintly. "Hundreds, maybe more, but they never returned the same." "Why?" Brendon asked. "Because crossing isn't about distance," the man said. "It's about permission." Brendon tilted his head. "Permission to be different than you were before." They floated in silence for a time. Then the boatman spoke again, softer this time. "Once I carried a knight named Sir Halric, strong as 3 men, revered by all. But he never smiled, never laughed, never rested." Brendon blinked. "My father spoke of him." The boatman nodded. "He wanted to be perfect, and in doing so, forgot to be human." "What happened to him?" "He died with honor," the man said, "but not with peace." The words struck deep. Brendon lowered his eyes to the water. He saw a reflection, not of his face, but his posture, always braced, always ready. The boatman added gently, "Honor is the world's recognition. Peace is yours." They reached the far shore. Brendon stepped out onto the bank. He turned to thank the boatman, but the boat was already gone. Only mist remained, and the river was still. Beyond the river, the forest gave way to open land. Hills rolled in soft curves. Wild flowers leaned in the breeze, and tucked between 2 quiet knolls was a farmhouse. Simple, warm, alive. Brendon approached cautiously. A woman stood in the garden, humming to herself as she gathered herbs. She looked up, smiled like she'd been expecting him. "No sword drawn," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "That's a good start. I mean no harm," Brendon offered. "Of course not," she replied, and motioned him inside. "Come. You look like someone who's forgotten how to eat slowly." The inside smelled of rosemary and bread. The seal walls were lined with books and dried flowers. A fire crackled low in the hearth. There were no weapons, no crests, no reminders of war, only gentleness. A man appeared from a back room, older, quiet, wiping his hands with a towel. They were farmers, partners, and as it turned out, both former knights. "We left the order years ago," The man explained, not out of shame, out of choice. Why? Brendon asked. The woman smiled. Because we got tired of proving ourselves to people who couldn't see us. Brendon stayed for 2 days. He helped with chores, fed chickens, carried water, laughed at nothing. Each task was simple, small, but done with care, intention, love. The rhythm of the farm taught him something the battlefield never had. That peace is not what happens when the war ends. It's what we create when we stop rushing toward something else. Before he left, the woman handed him a fresh loaf of bread and a flower tucked into the twine. The man handed him a small stone with a hole through its center. When the voices in your mind grow too loud, he said, look through this. It reminds you that even stone carries softness. Brendon bowed his head and walked on. The forest grew quieter as Brendon walked. Not empty, but expectant. Even the bird song had softened, as if the world was holding its breath. Ahead, through a veil of morning mist, stood the temple of golden light. It rose from the earth like a memory, simple and ancient, its smooth stone walls glowing faintly with warmth, not cast by sun. The doorway was open. No guards, no altar, no scripture, just stillness. Brendon stepped inside. The air within was thick with silence, not heavy, sacred. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand, but invites. He moved barefoot across smooth floors. Each step echoed softly until he reached the center. There was no throne, no sage waiting to greet him, just a single circular space filled with cushions and light. Brendon sat. His sword was not welcome here. Neither were his titles, his name, his roles. Only what remained beneath them. At first, the thoughts came loud and fast. You're wasting time. You're falling behind. Everyone will move ahead while you sit here. Brendon breathed in and out. He didn't try to silence the thoughts. He let them speak, let them unravel. He sat with them as one might sit with rain, uncomfortable, unavoidable, but passing. Hours felt like minutes, or maybe days. Time meant nothing in this place. Eventually, the thoughts slowed, not because they were conquered, but because they were seen. Beneath the noise he found stillness, not perfection, not bliss, but space. And in that space, a voice rose, not from outside, but within. You are not broken. You are becoming. Brendon closed his eyes, and for the first time, he believed it. The next morning, Mist clung low to the ground as Brendon followed a winding path through the trees. Eventually, he came to a low stone building wrapped in ivy, a library with no visible shelves. He stepped inside and paused. There were no books, no scrolls, only people, seated in quiet circles, speaking softly. At the center stood a woman in robes made of stitched parchment. She turned as he entered. "Welcome, knight," she said with a nod. "Here, stories are not read. They are spoken. When you're ready, tell yours." Brendon's breath caught. He had always been asked for reports, declarations, orders, never his story. He was led to a circle of strangers. No one asked his name. No one offered advice. They simply waited. Brendon hesitated. Then he began. He spoke of the pressure, the shadow of his father, the silent battles of overthinking, and the way no amount of praise ever felt real. He spoke of the loneliness of pretending, of the exhaustion of performing, of the shame in not being able to just be grateful. And still, no one interrupted. When he finished, the circle was quiet. Then one voice said, "I felt that too." Another nodded. "You are not strange, only human." There was no applause, no correction, no advice, only acceptance. And for Brendon, that was more healing than any sword, any battle, any victory. Before he left, the parchment-robed woman placed a single word in his hand, written on a torn scrap of paper, "Belonging." He folded it gently and carried it close. The tower stood alone. It pierced the fog like a silver needle, tall and impossibly narrow, its stones shimmering faintly, as if not entirely bound by this world. There were no guards, no doors, only a spiral staircase carved into the outside wall, leading upward through soft mist and starlight. Sir Brendon climbed. Each step felt like a breath he hadn't taken in years. The higher he rose, the quieter the world became, until all that remained was the soft sound of his boots against stone and the occasional gust of wind brushing past like a whisper. After what felt like hours, the stairway ended. A single archway opened into the heart of the tower. Inside was a round chamber, smooth walls, no corners, and no ceiling, and on every wall, mirrors. Brendon stepped forward. At first, they showed only his reflection, tired, thoughtful, weathered. But then, they began to shift. Each mirror now held a different version of him. One wore his father's armor, pristine, grand, unscarred. He stood tall, expression blank, perfectly composed. Another was younger, eyes full of doubt, mouth drawn in frustration. He was trying so hard to be liked. Another wore no armor at all, just rags and guilt. His shoulders were hunched, eyes heavy with shame. Another stood smiling, overconfident, loud. Empty beneath the grin, he turned slowly, taking them all in. Versions of himself he'd been, tried to be, feared becoming, then one mirror changed again. This version wore no armor, no mask, no shame. He was just standing, barefoot, at peace. Not perfect, not loud, but real. Brendon stepped toward it, and his reflection stepped forward too. They met in the center of the mirror, and when their palms touched, the glass shimmered and broke. Brendon did not flinch. The shards didn't fall. They floated, and from the air, a voice, low, gentle, and his own, whispered, "You are not the best or the worst thing you've been told you are. You are the one who stayed, the one who kept going." The shards turned to light, and Brendon stood, eyes closed, a tear on his cheek, smiling. After the tower, the path descended into a quiet grove. The trees here were old, impossibly so. Their roots curled like ancient script, and their leaves glowed with a soft amber light. In the very center of the grove hung a bell. It was large, carved from white stone, suspended by braided golden vines. But no rope, no clapper, no way to ring. It, and yet, carved beneath the bell were words, heard only when the heart is still. Brendon sat before it, cross-legged, silent. At first, his thoughts returned. Old habits. What did it mean? Was there a trick? Was he doing it wrong? But slowly, breath by breath, he let the questions pass. He focused on the stillness, not the silence of tension, but the kind that comes after trying, after proving, after resisting, and then, without warning, he heard it, a single tone, soft as twilight, round and full like the moon, the sound of something sacred being remembered. It resonated not through the air, but through him, a knowing, a calm, a permission. The bell had not moved, but it had spoken, and Brendon, night of rest, of breath, of becoming, bowed his head and listened. The cave mouth loomed before him, carved into the side of a black stone mountain, half swallowed by vines and shadow. It pulsed with a presence not quite alive, but certainly watching. Sir Brendon stood at the edge, alone. The air was thick here, not cold, just heavy. The kind of weight that sits on the chest, like a memory you haven't yet named. This was the place the kingdom feared, whispered about, avoided, the cave of dwelling pain, said to be filled with beasts twisted by sorrow, said to be cursed, said to devour the minds of those who entered. Brendon stepped forward anyway. He did not draw his sword. He simply entered. Inside, the world changed. The light from outside faded instantly, not into darkness, but into depth. Soft glows pulsed along the walls, as if the stone itself breathed slowly. The silence was absolute, not even his footsteps echoed, and then a voice, low, deep, like thunder in slow motion. "Why have you come here, knight?" Brendon paused. "I was told this place was dangerous," he said quietly. "But I think what's inside may not be what the world believes." The silence thickened then. From the shadows, a shape emerged, a creature taller than any man. All horns, scars, glowing eyes, and rippling limbs, but its movements were slow, fluid, gentle. It did not attack. It simply regarded him. "Most who enter come with fire in their hands," it said. "You come only with breath." Brendon nodded. "Because I've been at war with myself long enough. From the dark, others emerged. More creatures, different shapes, all shadowed and strange, but none hostile. They sat in a loose circle around him, watching, waiting, and one by one, they began to speak. They did not speak in riddles. They spoke in truth, and as they did, Brendon realized they were not monsters. They were feelings, fears, memories. Each one embodied something he had tried to push down, avoid, deny. One, small and sharp-eyed, said, "I am the fear of failure. I once protected you from trying too much. Now I bind you." Another, broad and silent, whispered, "I am guilt. I held you responsible for things never yours to carry." A third, lithe and strange, murmured, "I am shame. I came from voices not your own. You mistook me for truth." Brendon sat among them. He didn't run, didn't draw steel, didn't defend himself. He listened, and slowly the fear began to melt. "You are not broken," one said. placing a massive clawed hand on his shoulder. You are simply made of more than they ever understood. Another added, we were never meant to be fought, only faced. Brendon felt something inside loosen, a knot he'd carried since boyhood. I don't hate you, he whispered. I think I've needed you. The beings nodded, all at once. And now, said the tallest one, you are ready. The chamber deepened. The creatures led Brendon to a pool, glowing with light that shimmered like starlight underwater. Above it floated a sword, not forged in fire, but in stillness. Its hilt was simple. No jewels, no crest. Its blade shimmered, not with silver, but with soft, shifting light. This is not a weapon, one of the creatures said. This is a reminder. Brendon reached out. The moment his hand closed around the grip, warmth flooded through him. Not heat. Warmth, the kind that comes after grief, after truth, after being seen. He felt whole. This sword has no sharp edge, said the creature. It does not wound. It reflects. Brendon nodded, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel like a fraud holding it. He felt like himself. They named it together. Still Heart. Not a sword for war, a sword for presence, for choosing peace even when fear whispers otherwise. Brendon bowed to the beings, and they bowed in return as he left the cave. The mist parted. The sky broke open with stars, and a wind stirred through the trees, carrying only one word: return. Minas Terra had never looked smaller. As Sir Brendon stood upon the hill above the capital, the castle's towers seemed less imposing, the banners less loud, the walls less sure of themselves. He had once thought of this place as a monument to greatness, carved from expectation and stone. Now he saw it differently. It was just a place, built by hands, held together by people, and filled with the same longing he had once buried deep in his own chest. His return was quiet. No trumpet, no herald, no father waiting at the gates. Only a guard who blinked in surprise and said, "We thought you were." Brendon smiled gently. "I'm here now." The castle buzzed with unrest. An enemy had risen beyond the eastern mountains, a foreign force, fast and cruel, already claiming border towns. The council was panicked, the king uncertain. Whispers of war crept through every corridor. But Brendon did not rush to the war room. Instead, he moved slowly. He walked the halls walls that had once made him small, paused at doorways that had once held fear, nodded to squires who had once idolized him, and when he reached the council chamber, he entered not with bravado, but with still heart at his side. The room silenced as he stepped in, eyes turned, voices stopped. High Marshal Alric, Brendon's father, stood at the head of the table, armor polished like pride. He looked at his son and said nothing. Brendon did not bow. He placed the sword upon the stone table. "This is still heart," he said simply. "It is not for conquest, it is for clarity." One of the advisors scoffed. "We need blades that bite, not ones that glow." Brendon turned to him, calm. "And has all our biting brought us peace?" Silence. He stepped forward. "I've seen what fear becomes when ignored, what shame becomes when buried. The enemy you speak of will not be defeated with sharper steel, but with something our kingdom has forgotten." Understanding, his father's eyes narrowed. "And what would you have us do? Invite monsters into our walls?" Brendon met his gaze, steady, unshaking. "Yes." A murmur rose. Outrage, disbelief. Brendon raised a hand, not to command, but to invite quiet. "The beings in the cave of dwelling pain are not monsters. They are misunderstood. They have been listening longer than we've been speaking." He looked to the king. "They are strong, wise, and they are willing to help us, not because we deserve it, but because I asked them with honesty." "Hey." Room was still. The king leaned forward. "You believe they would fight for us?" Brendon shook his head. "No, they will fight with us. There is a difference." And for the first time in his life, Brendon was not speaking to prove himself, not to be enough, not to be seen. He was simply speaking the truth, and somehow that was more powerful than any battle cry he'd ever known. The sky above Minas Terra had turned gray. On the horizon, smoke curled from distant villages, and the wind carried the scent of fear. The invading army grew bolder by the hour, swift, merciless, unrelenting, and yet, as the kingdom braced for war, Sir Brendon stood at the city gates, still heart on his back. No banners, no battalion, only breath. Behind him, the council watched in quiet disbelief. Before him, the road stretched out into the mist, empty, until the ground began to hum. At first, it was subtle, a vibration beneath the stone, a breath beneath the earth. Then, from Sumay, the tree line, They emerged, not marching, not roaring, just walking, calm, purposeful. The beings from the cave of dwelling pain, tall and strange, glowing eyes, horns, wings, scars. But their presence was not violent. It was powerful. It was felt like standing in the presence of something ancient, not evil, but whole. The guards tensed. Hands reached for hilts. Brendon lifted a single hand. Stand down. The creatures stopped before him, forming a silent line across the open plain. One stepped forward, the tall one who had given him Stillheart. "We are here," the creature said in a voice like wind through hollow stone, "because one of yours listened when others ran." Brendon bowed slightly. "You are not weapons," he said softly. "You are wisdom, and we are finally ready to listen." When the enemy arrived, swift and armored, blades raised and banners high, they found no wall of archers, no boiling pitch, no horns of war. They found stillness, and then the beings moved, not to destroy, but to dismantle. Their strength was not in rage, it was in restraint. Their power was not to crush, it was to disarm. They turned the earth beneath the enemy's feet to mud, bent the wind so arrows veered off course, whispered words that made horses lay down and refuse to charge. Fear unraveled, blades fell, and the enemy fled, not because they were outmatched, but because they had no idea how to fight something that did not want to kill them. When it was over, there was no cheering, only quiet, the kind that follows revelation. Brendon stood beside the cave beings, the kingdom behind him, the mist clearing. His father approached, eyes filled with something Brendon had never seen there before. Not pride, but respect. "You did what I never could," Alric said quietly. "You saw strength in what we feared." Brendon looked out at the land, and for the first time, he felt at home. The great hall of Minas Terra had never felt this still. No songs were sung, no feasts were held, no banners waved in victory, and yet the air was thick with reverence, because something far greater than conquest had taken place. Understanding, unity, healing. Brendon stood before the throne, not in armor, not draped in silk, but in a simple cloak. Stillheart rested across his back, silent, unsharpened, undeniable. To his left stood the creatures once called monsters, now seen, respected, invited. To his right stood commoners, guards, healers, people who had felt forgotten, now drawn to something different. Not force, not fire, but something soft, something steady, something true. The king rose, his crown held in both hands. "Sir Brendon," he said, voice carrying through the stone hall like warm smoke, "you have done what centuries of steel could not. You have brought peace." The crown was offered, but Brendon stepped back. "I did not come for titles," he said gently. "I came to stop running." A murmur rippled through the room. He turned to the king and the people. "If this kingdom is to change," he said, "let it begin not with new rulers, but with new ways." He knelt, not in submission, but in humility, and placed Stillheart across his knees. "This is my oath," he said, "to protect not only the realm, but the hearts within it, to honor not only the strong, but the sensitive, to remind all who feel too much that they are not too little." The king bowed his head, then the council, then the court, and at last the people. No crown was placed upon Brendon's brow, but in the days to follow he was known by a title Nune had held before, Knight of Stillness, not highest in rank, but deepest in presence, the one who changed everything by becoming himself. The stars blinked gently above. A quiet night had settled across the valley, and the castle of Minas Terra now rested behind him, distant, softened by time. Sir Brendon sat at the edge of a small hill, the glow of a humble fire flickering beside him. No grand halls, no council, just grass beneath his boots, smoke curling toward the moon, and Stillheart resting gently against a mossy stone. He looked older now, not in years, but in knowing, in peace. He'd spent the day walking the village, paths, pausing for small conversations, listening more than he spoke. A squire had asked how to become great. He had smiled and said, "Learn how to sit with yourself. That's the beginning of everything." And now, in this quiet hour, with the stars above and the fire crackling like a lullaby, Brendon rested his hand over his heart and closed his eyes, not to fight sleep, but to welcome it. He did not think about what still needed doing. He did not worry about being enough. He did not brace for the next battle. He simply breathed, and as the wind passed over the hill, as the fire crackled low, a soft voice, not from the world, but from within, whispered, "You made it. You were always enough, even when you felt too much. You were never too little. You do not have to be perfect to be peaceful. You are safe to rest. And now, noble traveler, listener, wanderer, gentle soul, let the stillness Brendon found find you. Let the story settle in your chest like a glowing ember. Let your shoulders sink deeper into your bed. Let your thoughts drift like ships into the dark, safe sea of dreams. You are no longer holding everything. You don't have to. Breathe in. Breathe out. No need to try. You've done more than enough. Tonight, may your rest be easy, and your heart be still. Sleep well, dear night. The stars keep watch, and peace at last is yours.